So there's our 3 bears, our next 2 bears, and our 2 birds. What's interesting is these birds are somewhat sweeping forward down this hill, down this slope. Perhaps because from this vantage point, the Mississippi is either straight ahead and certainly it's to our left. Here the left wing tip. I'm panning down the left wing across the torso. Notice how much larger it is than the other birds we've seen, and beyond it the right wing, and beyond it the second bird. Looks like a pretty massive shoulder area of the bird. Here we get a sense of the size of this bird. It's quite large. Whether it's larger than what we've seen, I don't know. The front head area, not as distinct as what we've seen. In fact, it almost looks like it's a continuous, almost continuous line from the wing through the front of the head around to the next wing, although you can see a little bit of a break in the wing and the head right there where that lighted patch is. I stand at the head of the body where the head should be. You can see a considerable amount of, I think, material that has moved down the hill, and an almost lack of or depression. Here our second bird. It seems to have a much longer wingspan, at least this left wing does, but maybe I'm just imagining that. The head seems to be more distinct. We're at the farthest most point of the southern unit of effigies, and as I pan to my right, the slope, or the ridge if you will, a gentle ridge they have been climbing up, continues on up through there. At one time I would imagine this was all forested. Is this just reflecting also this break, if you will, this fence line and this end of the effigies? Does it also indicate the end of their society or their culture and its reason and basis for these effigies? I've seen examples of things like that in history. One of the most obvious and significant one was the Incas of Ollantaytambo in Peru, where the beautifully carved stones are alongside of other stones that are lying about in half-completed stages. That reflects the exact moment that the Spanish arrived in that community. It ended. Definitely a squared off tail on this bird, so we'll look for that in the guidebook. This is the town of Marquette, Iowa, just immediately south of Effigy Mounds National Monument. It's a small town on the Mississippi that has been wise enough to preserve its old architecture. Superb building for an antique shop, of course. I'll visit the inside of those stores on the walk back up. This building suggests that they were wise enough to keep the old buildings, or at least they had no choice economically. They gutted the bottom part and ruined it, but if the rest of the town, as we'll walk by it, is any indicator, now they've changed their mindset and are restoring the lower stories of these buildings. I think the problem for towns like this and the owners of these buildings and businesses is to have enough traffic to justify them economically staying alive. Fortunately, or hopefully, these people do. This was probably an important intersection in its day. A lot of the buildings have been nicely restored, which is really great. Near what might pass for a town square, although it's triangular, they're having a little civic gathering today of something sort. But notice all these old buildings that are still preserved around here, and that's a great thing. Someday, I hope that this will pay off. Because as more and more disappears, Americans should relish what remains. Grain elevator in the back giving us a hint as to what this economy has been based on. Probably a shipping point for grain grown to the west, but shipped on the Mississippi. 1857. That takes us back a ways, a little bit farther than some of the other places we've been in on this trip so far. A pretty little town square, or triangle. Looks like it's made up to be old like this is, and that's fine. They're just filling in what might have been bastardized and ripped down in the past. Bank and Land Agency, Granger. That's an old name in farming, I think, certainly in business. Masonic block. Now what we'll do is go down that side, poking into these shops. I think houses and buildings with balconies are a lot more fun, more interesting to live in, as well as to see. But I'm reminded of those magnificently carved wooden ones in Cusco, Peru. That's a cute place to stay. Almost indecipherable. It says, in recognition of this service of George Cleveland Hall, MD. Cute sign on a bar. Welcoming bar. The original, isn't it? Balcony above us. Ah, I love it when it's like this. Reminds me of 30, 40 years ago when I was doing antiques. Fun business. Now we can look at some of the buildings on the other side. The old paint reeks of history. The metal pieces holding it alive. Look how skewed the door itself is. Nevertheless, probably the whole frame is settled somehow. The woodwork hint of what might have been here once before, or cement work. Ironically, on this shop, the first story looks original, and it's the second story that's been either added or looks like it's added. It's a couple of the most authentic buildings in town, on the main street at least that I see. Closer look at what probably is the most interesting building in town. Nicely restored. Oscar Brothers, Front Builders, St. Louis, Missouri. I wonder if that means the builders of the fronts of stores and houses. So we're at Pikes Peak State Park, with apparently the highest point on the Mississippi and a great panorama view.